I always prided myself on being the kind of guy who looked out for his people. In our circle, loyalty wasn't just some abstract concept you talked about over beers, it was the baseline expectation. When Marcus called me 3 months ago, sounding like a man who had completely run out of options, I didn't even have to think about it. He was my best friend. We had been through college together, pulled each other out of countless tight spots, and shared a bond that felt closer than brotherhood. He told me his landlord had suddenly sold the building in downtown Seattle, giving him less than 3 weeks to find a new place in a brutal housing market, and his freelance design work had hit a massive dry spell. He was stressed, exhausted, and staring down the barrel of moving back in with his parents in Ohio, which he viewed as the ultimate defeat. I talked it over with Chloe that same night. Chloe, my wife of 4 years, was hesitant at first. She loved our space, our quiet weekend routines, and the privacy of our suburban townhouse. But she also knew how much Marcus meant to me. She saw the worry on my face and eventually agreed, saying that a few weeks on our living room couch wouldn't kill us if it meant keeping Marcus on his feet. We set up the pull-out sofa, cleared out a couple of drawers in the hallway closet, and told him the place was his until he got back on his legs. The first few weeks were actually great. It felt like a throwback to our college days, filled with late-night video game sessions, ordering takeout, and sitting around the kitchen island laughing about old times. Marcus was incredibly respectful of our space initially. He kept his area immaculate, always washed his dishes immediately, and made a point to disappear into the city during the day, so Chloe and I could have our evenings to ourselves. Chloe's initial reservations seemed to melt away. She went from being politely distant to actively including him in our dinner plans, cooking larger portions, and asking him about his job hunt. I remember feeling a deep sense of pride and contentment during those early days. I had a beautiful, loving wife, a stable corporate job in logistics that kept us comfortable, and my best friend under the same roof, getting his life back on track. It felt like we were an unbreakable team. But as the days bled into weeks, and the weeks into the second month, the dynamic in the house began to shift in subtle ways that I didn't notice at first. Marcus's freelance gigs started picking up again, which meant he was spending more time at the house, working from the dining room table. Since I commuted an hour each way to my corporate office in the city, leaving early in the morning and returning late in the evening, Marcus and Chloe began spending a significant amount of time alone together. Chloe worked from home 3 days a week as a freelance graphic coordinator, so they shared the house for hours on end while I was stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic on I-5. Looking back, the signs were there, buried beneath the surface of our mundane, everyday interactions, but I was too blind, too trusting, and too exhausted from work to see them for what they really were. It started with small things. I would come home and notice that the laughter in the living room would abruptly stop the moment my keys jingled in the front door. I dismissed it as paranoia, convincing myself that they were just finishing up a conversation or joking about something I wouldn't understand. Then there were the inside jokes that started popping up at the dinner table. Chloe would make a passing reference to a podcast or a random internet meme, and she and Marcus would share a brief, knowing look that left me feeling like a stranger in my own home. When I asked about it, Chloe would just laugh it off, saying, "Oh, it's just something we talked about earlier today, babe. You had to be there." I smiled and nodded, pushing down the tiny knot of unease forming in my stomach. After all, Marcus was my brother. Chloe was my wife. To suspect anything else would be a betrayal of the two people I loved most in the world. Then the physical boundaries began to blur in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. One Saturday evening, we were all watching a movie on the couch. I was sitting in the armchair, and Chloe and Marcus were sharing the large sectional. At one point, during a scary scene, Chloe naturally leaned over and rested her head on Marcus's shoulder for a brief second before catching herself and pulling back, looking over at me with a quick, nervous smile. Marcus didn't flinch. He just kept his eyes glued to the screen, but his posture had gone completely rigid. I felt a sudden, sharp prick of jealousy, followed immediately by an overwhelming wave of guilt for even feeling that way. It was just a movie, I told myself. They were just comfortable with each other. They were becoming friends, which is exactly what I had wanted. But the atmosphere in the house grew heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that I could practically feel against my skin. Chloe became increasingly distant with me, her usual warmth replaced by a distracted, irritable demeanor. Whenever I tried to hug her from behind while she was cooking or initiate intimacy at night, she would complain about being too tired, stressed about work, or having a headache. Yet during the day, whenever I caught glimpses of her talking to Marcus in the kitchen, she seemed vibrant, alive, and full of an energy that she hadn't shown me in months. She started dressing differently too, wearing nicer loungewear around the house instead of her usual oversized college sweatshirts, and taking extra time with her hair and makeup, even on days when she had no video calls for work. When I complimented her, she would shrug it off carelessly, but I noticed her eyes would instinctively dart toward Marcus to see if he was watching. The breaking point for my subconscious suspicion came during the first week of the third month. I had left my laptop charger at home and had to drive back from the office in the middle of the morning to retrieve it. When I walked through the front door unannounced, the house was dead silent, save for the low murmur of voices coming from the kitchen. I walked down the hallway and found them standing incredibly close to each other by the coffee maker. Marcus was leaning against the counter, and Chloe was standing directly in front of him, her hand resting lightly on his forearm as they whispered about something. The moment they heard my footsteps, they leaped apart as if they had been hit by an electric shock. Chloe's face flushed a deep, guilty crimson, and Marcus immediately began fumbling with a coffee mug, his eyes darting anywhere but at me. "Hey, what are you doing home?" Chloe asked, her voice an octave higher than normal, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "Forgot my charger," I said slowly, my eyes tracking the distance between them, my heart beginning to thud heavily against my ribs. "What were you guys talking about?" Just planning dinner," Marcus chimed in, his voice forced and unnaturally hearty. "Chloe was saying she wanted to try that new Thai place down the street." I knew he was lying.
You don't whisper like star-crossed lovers and jump 10 feet apart over a discussion about Thai food. But the sheer weight of the implication was too massive for my brain to process in that moment. To accept that my best friend and my wife were hiding something from me meant destroying my entire reality. So once again, I chose the easier path. I chose to believe the lie. I grabbed my charger, made a forced joke to cut the suffocating tension in the room, and drove back to the office with a hollow, sickening ache opening up in the center of my chest. That ache grew over the next 2 weeks, turning into an all-consuming dread. I started staying later at the office, dreading the drive home because I didn't know what kind of environment I was walking into. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. I watched them interact with a hypervigilance that was driving me insane. Every look, every brush of the shoulders in the hallway, every shared smile felt like a physical blow. I wanted to confront them, to scream at them to tell me what was going on, but a terrifying part of me was paralyzed by the fear of what the answer might be. I didn't want to know. I wanted to wake up from what felt like a slow-motion nightmare and find that everything was back to normal. Then came the Tuesday that shattered my life into a million jagged pieces. I had been assigned to a major quarterly audit at work, a massive project that required me to stay at the downtown office until at least midnight to coordinate with our East Coast branch. I had told Chloe about this a week prior, and I reminded her again that morning as I kissed her cheek goodbye. She had seemed unusually bright and cheerful, telling me not to worry about dinner and to take all the time I needed. Marcus had given me a supportive slap on the shoulder, telling me to go crush it. The audit started smoothly, but by 7:30 p.m., the regional director called a sudden halt to the proceedings. A massive software glitch on the East Coast servers had corrupted the data payload, meaning the audit couldn't continue until the IT teams resolved the issue, which wouldn't be until the following morning. We were all told to pack up and go home. As I walked out to the parking garage, a strange, heavy silence fell over me. I looked at my phone, my thumb hovering over Chloe's name to text her that I was on my way home early. But a dark, sickening instinct, a voice in the back of my mind that I had been suppressing for months, told me to stop. "Don't text her," the voice whispered. "Just go home." My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The drive back to the suburbs usually took an hour, but that night, the highway was eerily clear. The city lights blurred outside my window as a terrible, suffocating weight settled onto my chest. I drove in total silence, the radio off, the only sound the rhythmic thumping of my tires against the asphalt and the frantic, roaring beat of my own heart. I didn't want to believe what my gut was telling me, but the dread was a physical presence in the car, choking the air right out of my lungs. By the time I pulled into our quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, the clock on the dashboard read 8:45 p.m. The house was dark, save for the faint, warm glow of the living room lamp filtering through the blinds. Marcus's car was in the driveway. Chloe's SUV was parked right behind it. I turned off my headlights, rolled quietly to a stop at the curb, and sat there in the dark, staring at my own front door, terrified of what lay on the other side. I sat in the suffocating darkness of my car for what felt like an eternity, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The suburban street was dead silent, a stark contrast to the absolute war raging inside my chest. Part of me, the logical, desperate part, wanted to laugh at myself, to turn the key, drive to a fast food drive-thru, and come back in an hour acting like nothing was wrong. I wanted to believe that they were just watching a movie, or that Marcus was in his room and Chloe was reading in bed. But the heavy, metallic taste of dread in my mouth told a different story. My gut knew the truth long before my brain was willing to articulate it. I finally turned off the ignition, the sudden silence of the engine sounding like a gunshot in the quiet neighborhood. I got out of the car, closing the door with agonizing slowness, ensuring the latch clicked into place without a sound. Walking up the concrete driveway felt like marching toward my own execution. Every step was heavy, my legs feeling like they were encased in lead. I bypassed the squeaky loose board on the front porch that I'd been meaning to fix for months, navigating the shadows of my own home like a thief. When I reached the front door, I slipped my house keys out of my pocket, holding the brass rings between my fingers so they wouldn't jingle. I inserted the key into the deadbolt, turning it with millimeter precision. Click. The sound was microscopic, but to my hyper-alert senses, it echoed like thunder. I pushed the door open an inch at a time. The entryway was dark, smelling faintly of the vanilla candle Chloe always burned when she wanted the house to feel cozy. But the usual warmth of the home was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, thick tension that made it hard to breathe. The downstairs area was completely empty. The television was off, and the pull-out sofa where Marcus slept was neatly made, its sheets tucked in tightly. A single low-wattage lamp was on in the corner of the living room, casting long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floor. Then, I heard it. It wasn't a loud noise, just a faint, muffled sound vibrating through the ceiling from the second floor. A soft, breathless laugh. It was a sound I knew intimately, a sound that had belonged exclusively to me for the last 6 years of my life. It was Chloe's laugh, but it carried a playful, uninhibited cadence that I hadn't heard from her in a very long time. It was followed by the low, rumbling murmur of a man's voice. Marcus. A sudden, violent wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to lean my shoulder against the drywall of the entryway to keep from collapsing. My heart wasn't just beating, it was slamming against my ribs with a frantic, erratic rhythm that threatened to choke me. The room spun around me, the familiar family photos on the wall blurring into meaningless shapes. I had a choice right then. I could scream, I could stomp up those stairs and demand answers, or I could walk away. But the betrayal was already a living, breathing entity in the house, and I needed to see it. I needed the undeniable proof to shatter the desperate lies I had been telling myself for months. I kicked off my dress shoes, standing in my socks to deaden any sound. I began to climb the carpeted stairs, pressing my weight against the outer edges of the steps where the wood was sturdiest, avoiding the notorious creaks. With every step I took, the voices became clearer, the reality sharper, cutting into my soul like a rusty blade. By the time I reached the top landing, the sounds were unmistakable. They weren't coming from the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. They were coming from our master bedroom, my bedroom, the bed that Chloe and I had picked out together, the space that was supposed to be our sanctuary, the ultimate boundary of our marriage. The master bedroom door was cracked open about 3 inches, a sliver of warm yellow light spilling out onto the dark hallway carpet. I crept closer, my breathing so shallow it made my chest ache. I stood outside the door, paralyzed, peering through the narrow gap. The sight that met my eyes instantly burned itself into my retinas, a permanent scar that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. Chloe was sitting on the edge of our mattress, wearing a silk robe I had bought her for our last anniversary. Marcus was standing right in front of her, stripped down to his t-shirt and boxers. He was holding a glass of wine, laughing softly as he leaned down to kiss the top of her head. Chloe looked up at him, her eyes bright with an adoring, infatuated glow that she used to reserve only for me. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jawline before wrapping around his neck, pulling him down toward her. "I still can't believe we have the whole night," Chloe whispered, her voice dripping with an intimacy that made my blood run cold. I was so stressed he'd find some excuse to come home early, but he stuck at the office until at least midnight. Marcus let out a soft chuckle, running a hand through her hair. "I told you not to worry, babe. He's so buried in that audit, he doesn't have a clue. He's too trusting for his own good. Honestly, it's almost too easy." Hearing those words, "it's almost too easy," from the man I had called my brother, the man I had taken into my home out of pure love and loyalty, did something to my brain. The profound sadness and crippling shock vanished in an instant, replaced by a blinding, white-hot rage that consumed every inch of my being. The room went cold. The frantic beating of my heart froze into a solid, heavy block of pure hatred. I didn't feel like a husband or a friend anymore. I felt like a spectator watching the ultimate desecration of my life. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. A terrifying, unnatural calmness washed over me, a survival mechanism kicking in to shield me from the sheer magnitude of the pain. I reached into my pocket, my fingers moving with steady, icy precision, and pulled out my smartphone. I raised the camera, aligning the lens with the 3-inch gap in the doorway. I hit the record button. Through the screen, I watched them. I watched my wife of 4 years slide the robe off her shoulders. I watched my best friend since freshman year of college lean over her, kissing her deeply, his hands gripping her waist. I recorded everything for a full, agonizing minute. The video was crystal clear, capturing their faces, their voices, and the utter disregard they had for the man who was currently providing the very roof over their heads. I needed this. I knew how manipulative Chloe could be, how charming Marcus was. If I confronted them without undeniable, irrefutable proof, they would find a way to gaslight me, to turn it around, to make me feel like the crazy one. But you can't gaslight a high-definition video. Once I had enough, I lowered the phone and saved the file. The digital weight of that video felt like a loaded weapon in my palm. I stood in the dark hallway for 5 more seconds, listening to the muffled sounds of their betrayal continuing just feet away from me. I felt a profound, hollow emptiness opening up inside me, a sudden realization that the life I had built, the marriage I had cherished, and the friendship I had relied on were all completely dead. They had murdered them, right here, on my own thread count sheets. Slowly, methodically, I turned around. I walked back down the stairs, making sure to hit every creaking step on purpose this time, no longer caring if they heard me. I walked out the front door, closing it firmly behind me, and walked back down the driveway to my car. I got inside, locked the doors, and sat beneath the amber glow of the street lamp, staring up at the lighted window of our bedroom. My hands were no longer shaking.
They were cold, steady, and ready for whatever came next. I sat in my idling car 2 houses down, watching the upstairs window. The adrenaline that had carried me down the stairs began to recede, leaving behind a cold, hollow shock that settled deep into my bones. My phone rested in the cup holder, its screen dark, but the weight of the video file inside it felt like a ticking bomb. I looked at the dashboard clock, 9:15 p.m. They thought they had 3 more hours. 3 more hours of rewriting my life behind my back, mocking my trust, and treating my home like their private oasis. A dark, calculated clarity took over. If I went back in there right now and started screaming, it would turn into a pathetic, dramatic scene. Marcus would act remorseful, Chloe would cry, and they would immediately go into damage control mode, trying to mitigate the fallout. I didn't want a scene. I wanted consequences. I wanted them to experience the exact moment their constructed reality came crashing down around them, without the luxury of preparation. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, navigating the quiet suburban streets without really seeing them. I drove to a 24-hour diner about 10 minutes away, a brightly lit, sterile place that smelled of old coffee and grease. I slid into a vinyl booth in the back corner, ordering a black coffee that I didn't touch. I pulled out my phone and went to work. First, I opened my banking app.
Chloe and I shared a primary checking and savings account, but I had a separate high-yield savings account that my inheritance from my grandfather had been sitting in. I immediately transferred the bulk of our liquid joint savings, money that I had predominantly earned through my bonuses, into my private account, leaving exactly half of the baseline balance, so she couldn't claim I cleaned her out completely in court. Then, I opened our shared cell phone plan and downloaded the call and text logs for the past 3 months. Looking at the data spread across the screen, it was sickeningly obvious. Hundreds of texts back and forth while I was sitting at my desk at work. Dozens of calls lasting over an hour during my morning and evening commutes. It was a secondary relationship flourishing right under my nose. Next, I opened my email. I created a secure cloud folder and uploaded the video I had just taken, along with screenshots of the phone records. I drafted an email to a top-tier divorce attorney in Seattle, whose name a coworker had mentioned months ago during his own messy separation. I attached the link to the folder and typed out a short, emotionless message. I have irrefutable proof of my wife's infidelity with a household guest. I want to file for divorce immediately. Please let me know your earliest availability for a consultation tomorrow morning. I hit send. The digital swoosh of the outgoing mail felt like the first real breath I had taken all night. But I wasn't done. The anger inside me wasn't a wild, explosive thing anymore. It had hardened into a sharp, clinical weapon. I thought about Marcus's parents back in Ohio. They were traditional, sweet people who had treated me like a second son whenever I visited. I thought about our mutual college friends, the tight-knit group that looked up to Marcus as the creative, charismatic leader. I thought about Chloe's parents, who constantly praised me for being a stable provider husband for their daughter. They all deserved to see the truth. I set up a delayed group message on an encrypted app, adding Chloe, Marcus, both sets of our parents, and our 4 closest college friends. I uploaded the video to the chat, but did not hit the final send button yet. I timed the release for exactly 10:30 p.m. I wanted to give myself enough time to get back to the house, to look them in the eye, and to be standing right there when the notification shattered their world. I paid for the untouched coffee, walked back to my car, and began the drive home. The dread was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical detachment. I felt like an actor stepping onto a stage, knowing exactly how the play was going to end, while the other actors were still blindly following an old script. When I pulled back onto our street at 10:15 p.m., the house was still dark downstairs, but the upstairs light was now off. A faint television glow emanated from the living room window. They had finished. They were probably downstairs now, sitting on the very couch Marcus slept on, acting like casual housemates again, waiting for the clock to tick closer to midnight. I walked up the porch steps, my boots heavy and loud this time. I didn't hide my approach. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open with a deliberate, firm force. The living room television was playing a random sitcom on Netflix. Marcus was sitting on one end of the sectional, wrapped in a blanket, holding his laptop as if he were working. Chloe was sitting on the other end, a glass of wine in her hand, scrolling through her phone. The picture of domestic innocence. The moment I walked in, they both froze. Chloe's eyes widened in genuine, undisguised terror, her grip tightening on her wine glass. Marcus's laptop screen wobbled as his hands gave an involuntary twitch. "Babe?" Chloe said, her voice shaking slightly, before she quickly tried to smooth it over with a forced smile. What are you doing home? You said the audit was going until midnight." "It wrapped up early," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any anger or warmth. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and walked back into the living room, standing right at the edge of the rug, looking down at them. Marcus cleared his throat, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Hey man, that's awesome. Glad you got out of there. Must have been a killer day." He wouldn't look me in the eye.
He was looking at my chest, his shoulders tense, ready to bolt. "Yeah, it was an interesting day," I replied, taking a slow sip of water. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I looked at the digital clock on the screen. 10:28 p.m. 2 minutes left. Chloe stood up, setting her wine glass down on the coffee table with a sharp clink. She walked toward me, her arms crossing over her chest in a defensive posture. "Are you okay? You're acting really weird. You're staring at us like we did something wrong." The sheer audacity of her gaslighting almost made me laugh. Even now, caught completely off guard, her first instinct was to turn it around on me, to make my demeanor the problem. "I'm fine, Chloe," I said quietly. I looked at Marcus. "How's the job hunt going, Marcus? Find a new place yet?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Yeah, looking at a couple of apartments downtown this weekend. Just waiting on a few invoices to clear." "Don't worry about the weekend," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming ice cold. "You're leaving tonight." The room went completely silent. The laugh track from the television sitcom felt incredibly loud and mocking. Chloe took a step back, her face losing all its color. "What? What are you talking about? Why are you being like this?" "Yeah, man, what did I do?" Marcus asked, attempting a pathetic display of offended innocence, though his eyes were darting toward the front door. I didn't answer them. I just looked down at my phone. The clock struck 10:30 p.m. A second later, Chloe's phone on the coffee table buzzed with a loud, aggressive vibration. At the exact same moment, Marcus's phone on the sofa cushion lit up. In the distance, upstairs in our bedroom, I could hear the faint ping of Chloe's iPad receiving the same notification. Chloe frowned, her brow furrowing as she reached out and picked up her phone. Marcus picked up his as well. I watched their faces. I watched the exact millisecond the realization hit them. I watched Chloe's eyes scan the group chat name, see the list of recipients, her parents, his parents, our friends, and then saw her thumb instinctively hit the play button on the video file. The faint, muffled sound of her own breathless laughter from 30 minutes ago began to play from her speaker. The silence that followed the audio playing from her phone was absolute, heavy and suffocating. The faint, breathless sound of Chloe's own voice echoed in the small living room, a brutal contrast to the sudden, frozen terror on her face. She dropped the phone onto the coffee table as if it had burned her, her hands flying to her mouth. Across the couch, Marcus looked down at his screen, his face turning an ash-gray color so fast I thought he might pass out. The laptop slid right off his lap, hitting the hardwood floor with a loud plastic crack, but he didn't even blink.
"Oh my God," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking, her eyes wide and wild as they locked onto mine. "Oh my God, Brian. No, please tell me you didn't send this." "It's already out there," I said, my voice eerily calm, sounding like a stranger's even to myself. "Your mom, your dad, Marcus's parents, Dave, Sarah, everyone. They all just got a front row seat to what you two have been doing in my house, on my bed." Marcus finally looked up, his lips trembling, his hand shaking violently as he tried to stand. "Brian, man, listen to me. We didn't mean to. It just happened, man, I swear." "Shut up, Marcus," I interrupted, not even raising my voice, but the sheer venom behind it made him freeze mid-sentence. "Don't you ever call me man or brother again. You were drowning, and I brought you into my home. I fed you. I paid the rent, the utilities, everything, so you could get back on your feet. And you spent that time figuring out how to sleep with my wife. You are a parasite." "Brian, please," Chloe sobbed, stepping toward me, her hands reaching out blindly, but I took a deliberate step back, refusing to let her touch me. The tears were streaming down her face now, ruining the makeup she had carefully put on for him earlier. "It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake. We were just lonely and you were always at work and things just got confused. Please call them, tell them it's a joke, delete the message. Please, Brian, don't do this to us."
"Do this to you?" I let out a short, hollow laugh that felt entirely devoid of joy. "You did this to yourselves. You chose to do this every single day for the last 3 months. Every time I drove to work, every time I sat in traffic, you two were laughing at how easy it was to fool me. I saw the texts, Chloe. I downloaded the call logs. Don't look at me like this is some sudden accident. You built this nightmare piece by piece." Right then, Chloe's phone began to ring on the table. The caller ID lit up with her mother's name. A second later, Marcus's phone started buzzing continuously in his hand, a barrage of text messages incoming from our college group chat. The fallout was instantaneous, a digital avalanche crashing down on them in real time. Chloe looked at her ringing phone in pure panic, burying her face in her hands as she began to hyperventilate. "Marcus, pack your things," I said, pointing a finger at the stairs. "You have exactly 10 minutes to get everything you own out of my house. If you are still inside this door at 10:45, I am calling the police and throwing your lifestyle out onto the driveway." Marcus didn't argue. The arrogant, charming friend who had been lounging on my sofa minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified, broken coward. He scrambled up the stairs, taking them two at a time, the sounds of his frantic packing echoing down into the living room.
Chloe dropped to her knees on the rug, grabbing at my jeans, her voice choked with desperate, hysterical tears. "Please, Brian, don't throw me out. I love you. I love you. I swear I do. It didn't mean anything to him. It was just a distraction. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. Please don't throw away our marriage over this." I looked down at her, looking at the woman I had promised to protect and cherish for the rest of my life. I expected to feel a surge of anger or a desire to scream back at her, but all I felt was a profound, exhausting emptiness. The love I had carried for her for 6 years hadn't just died, it had been completely erased, replaced by an overwhelming sense of disgust. "Our marriage died the second you let him into our room, Chloe," I said softly, peeling her fingers off my clothes with an icy finality. "I already emailed my attorney tonight. You'll be served with divorce papers by the end of the week. Half of the joint checking balance is still there. Take it and find a hotel, because you're not staying here tonight either." "You can't just throw me out of my own house," she screamed, her grief suddenly turning into a flash of defensive rage. "My name is on the lease too." "Then stay," I replied, standing tall and looking around the empty space. "But I'm leaving. I'm checking into a hotel downtown, and my lawyer is filing an emergency motion first thing in the morning. Enjoy the quiet house, Chloe."
Enjoy explaining that video to your parents when they call you back. Just then, Marcus came rushing down the stairs, carrying 2 oversized duffel bags and his laptop case, his clothes haphazardly spilling out of the zippers. He didn't say a word, he didn't look at Chloe, and he definitely didn't look at me. He practically ran through the entryway, threw open the front door, and vanished into the cool suburban night, the door clicking shut behind him. His hasty retreat was the ultimate proof of how cheap their connection really was. The moment the storm hit, he abandoned her without a second thought. Chloe watched the door close, the reality of her total isolation finally sinking in. She collapsed back onto the floor, her shoulders heaving as she wept into the empty room. Her phone was still buzzing text alerts, a relentless reminder of the social suicide they had just committed. I walked upstairs to our bedroom. I didn't look at the bed. I kept my eyes fixed on the closet, grabbing a suitcase and throwing in enough clothes, suits, and essentials to last me a couple of weeks. I grabbed my passport, my personal documents, and my spare laptop charger. Every movement was calm, deliberate, and precise. The house felt completely different now. No longer a home, just a collection of wood and drywall where a terrible crime had been committed. I carried my suitcase downstairs. Chloe was still on the living room floor, her crying reduced to a quiet, pathetic whimper. She didn't look up as I walked past her into the entryway. I opened the front door, stepping out onto the porch into the crisp, clean midnight air. I took a deep, full breath, the oxygen finally clearing the lingering taste of vanilla and betrayal out of my lungs. I walked down the driveway, placed my suitcase in the trunk of my car, and got behind the wheel. As I backed out of the driveway and drove away from the darkened townhouse, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The shared life I had known was completely gone, reduced to a smoking ruin in a single evening. The road ahead was going to be brutal, filled with legal battles, awkward conversations, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding my trust from scratch. But as the city lights appeared on the horizon, a strange, quiet sense of peace settled over me. I was hurt, I was broken, and I was entirely alone. But for the first time in months, I was finally living in the truth.